To our 2015 Solution Summit in the Tri-Cities. This is a two-day event. We're kicking it off here in Kennewick, and then we'll be in Bellevue tomorrow. So we appreciate you starting the new year off with Washington Policy Center. My name is Dan Meade Smith. I'm the president of the Washington Policy Center, and it's great to be with you this morning. I want to welcome you to the opening session of our conference. We are excited to be able to open this event here in Kennewick. And for the next few hours, you're going to hear from some fantastic speakers covering some important issues, hear from some of our nation's leading policy thinkers, including Congressman Doc Hastings. You'll hear from him here in just a little bit. Our keynote speaker at lunch is the governor of Idaho, Butch Otter. He'll be here in a few minutes, and he'll be speaking at noon. And then we have breakout sessions throughout the morning. We have 2 concurrent sessions that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But everyone should have a program. It's on your seat. That will kind of be your guide for the day, and you can pick and choose the sessions that you want to attend. We also take your feedback and comments very seriously. That's how we plan the next event. So make sure you fill out your survey throughout the day and return it at the end of the conference. This is our second time doing this. We did this in November of 2013, and we did it here in Tri-Cities. So it's great to be back, and it's time this year for the legislative session. I think a lot of you have heard about what's coming up here just on Monday when the legislature convenes. It's without an exaggeration, I think it's one of the most important legislative sessions in state history, definitely in recent memory. You'll hear why today, but there's so many key issues that we'll be looking at over the next few months in Olympia. And so it's important for citizens like you to hear about these policy ideas and to most importantly be engaged on these issues over the next few weeks. An event like this, as you know, cannot happen on its own. We have a great team at the Washington Policy Center led by Chris Cargill, who's our Eastern Washington director. But our whole team is over here today from the east side, or from the west side, over here on the east side, to help put on the event today. And we also have numerous sponsors of the event, so let me thank them quickly here. Our statewide sponsors for both events, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Chevron, Case Smith, Keep Washington Competitive, Physicians Insurance, Primera Blue Cross, and Washington Trust Bank. And then we have numerous local and regional sponsors, Columbia Bank, Lamson International, the Home Builders Association of Tri-Cities, Anderson Hay and Grain, Reese Concrete Products, Tippett Company, Sensky Lawn and Tree Care Services, Mickey McKinnon Insurance, Yakima Valley Community Foundation, Conover Insurance, and Tom Power. Please join me in thanking all of today's sponsors that made today's event possible. We have several media partners. It's great for us to get our message out to folks that can't attend today through the media. The Tri-Cities Journal of Business, Yakima Valley Business Times. Charter Cable is taping the entire conference. So for those of you that can't stay the whole day, or for those of you that know folks that weren't able to attend, let them know that the conference will be on Charter Cable here in the next couple of weeks. So you can check our website at washingtonpolicy.org for the air dates. And then we're thrilled to have News Talk 870 KFLD, who's broadcasting in the lobby the entire conference. So it's great to have them broadcasting what's going on to the local Tri-Cities radio audience. We have many local co-presenters, too, that helped us spread the word. They're listed on the back of your program. We appreciate all the local business groups and around the state who helped us get folks here today. As I mentioned, the event serves as a primer for some of our major challenges we're facing as a state. There'll be critical decisions made in the coming weeks, and we're glad you're with us this morning. Those decisions will be made by our elected officials, and we have numerous legislators and local elected officials. Would you all stand and be recognized for your service? We appreciate everyone being with us this morning. That serves our state. Representative Schmick, everyone stand up. That's from our elected official. Thank you. For those of you that are new to the Washington Policy Center, every time we do an event in Tri-Cities, it gets bigger and we bring in more folks that are new to the organization. We appreciate that. One way to get engaged is to fill out this blue card that's on your table. You can join the Policy Center, receive our weekly emails during the legislative session, receive our publications, be invited to events like this. You can join for free by filling out this card. So I encourage you to do that if you're not already a member of the Policy Center. You'll be invited to our events. We hold an annual dinner in Spokane where we have 700 people, fantastic speakers. It's a great way to get engaged on public policy issues. In your packet, you'll find more information about the organization. There's also information at the information table out front. And then we designed a special online conference program or packet that's on our website. So if you go to washingtonpolicy.org, on our homepage, you can access material from all of our speakers, from all of our research center directors. That gives you information on the issues we're covering today. So I encourage you to go there and download the online conference packet. Washington Policy Center, for those of you that are new, is a nonprofit, independent public policy organization. We're divided into 6 research centers. That's the issues that we focus on: small business, transportation, environment, government reform, healthcare, and education. So those are the issues we're covering today based on the research team we have at the Washington Policy Center. We also have a great resource for you during this session. That's our website, washingtonvotes.org. So in addition to washingtonpolicy.org, our main website, Washington Votes summarizes every single bill that's introduced in the legislature. So there'll be 2,000 or 3,000 bills introduced over the next few weeks. Washington Votes summarizes all of those bills and lets you track them throughout the session. So if you're interested in healthcare issues, you can sign up, and all the healthcare bills will be emailed to you when they're introduced and when there's an action on those bills. So it's a great resource. I encourage you to use washingtonvotes.org during the legislative session. One of the research centers, as I mentioned, is our education center. And I wanted to show a short video that gives you a good example of the impact that we're having across the state. So one of our long-term recommendations has been education reform, and in particular charter schools. We're big fans of competition and choice for education, and we had a great victory in 2012 when our state passed the Charter School Initiative. And that initiative is now being implemented, and charter schools are opening all across the state. And this is a very short video that talks about the impact that charter schools are having and will have across Washington.
At the Washington Policy Center, we are so excited about charter schools and what they're going to be doing for K-12 education. Charter schools give administrators powerful new tools, they give teachers freedom and flexibility that they need, and most importantly, they improve learning for students. What is a charter school? A charter school is a community-based public school that operates independently of central district management and administrative rules. Charter schools allow local educators to offer innovations in school staffing, scheduling, educational programs, and in the use of technology. One of the first charter schools to open in our state will open in the Spokane School District in August of 2015.
Spokane Public Schools is one of a number of districts throughout the nation that is starting a portfolio approach. And so we have a number of options for parents and families. So charter is one more option within our portfolio. And families are really looking for that, especially this generation of parents and families. They're looking for more individualized learning, a balance of blended learning, which is more technology integrated into the classroom.
So we're a STEM school, which is a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics school. Our students take twice as much math and science. They have a tablet or a computer with them all day long, and they're learning computer science and engineering within their coursework so that our students are really well prepared for entering into college and pursuing STEM degrees if that's what they choose.
Each new public charter school will be tuition-free and open to all students and will focus on serving low-income and disadvantaged families in each community. The very first public charter school to open in our state is First Place Scholars Charter School in Seattle, which serves homeless children and their families.
We're extremely excited about the prospect of becoming a charter school. We will close and reopen and have our first students as a charter school this coming September 2014. We do have a reputation and we have a track record of bringing a level of support and stability to our families that no one else can rival. This school represents a way to help our kids rise up out of poverty, do better than the last generation, which has always been the goal for many of our families. It's a way for our kids to stop falling through the cracks, and it can be, I believe, it can be replicable.
From SOAR Academy in Tacoma, we have Christina Bellamy McLean.
SOAR will open the next year in the fall of 15, and it's historic because this is the first time that choice, public school choice, has been available to the students and families of Washington State.
From Summit Charter Schools in Seattle and Tacoma, we have Jen Davis Wickens.
If you look at the results of some of the high-performing charter networks across the nation, they're phenomenal, and what they're doing for students is exactly what we want for students here in our own state. So for example, Summit is preparing 100% of their students to apply to a 4-year college. 96% of all Summit graduates are admitted to at least one 4-year college. We need to see these same results in Washington. We know kids can do it, and we believe the charter movement will support us in getting there.
Washington Policy Center, through our new Initiative 1240 Charter School Follow-Up Project, will continue to inform parents and the public about the exciting new opportunities charter schools will bring children and their families in our communities. For example, our latest publication, Opening New Doors for Students, provides an overview of the first new charter schools approved that will open over the next 2 years. To read this study and keep informed about charter school developments and how these exciting opportunities can be expanded in our state, visit our website at www.washingtonpolicy.org.
So you can see why we're so excited about this. As one of the principal said, it's the first time that choice is available in our state, and that's what's really key, is choice and competition in education. And when 1/3 of students across our state don't graduate, 1/3 is the average in Washington State that don't graduate, and 96% of that charter school goes to college. And these are serving low-income inner-city students. That's something to be excited about. So we hope that you'll join with us as we help make sure that they're a success in our state. As I mentioned, 5 years ago, we increased our footprint and effectiveness in Eastern Washington by opening an Eastern Washington office. For those of you that are a member of the Policy Center, you've seen our Viewpoint magazine that celebrates our 5-year anniversary. Chris Cargill is our Eastern Washington director. Jason Mercier, now who runs our Government Reform Center, is based here in the Tri-Cities. Chris covers the whole eastern side of the state. So it's great to have 2 offices in Eastern Washington. And the impact that Chris and our team have had in Eastern Washington has exceeded our expectations as far as media coverage, bringing in new members, attendance at events, and most importantly, policy impact. So I want to bring up Chris, talk a little bit about our Eastern Washington office, and then he'll introduce our speaker, Doc Hastings. Chris?
Good morning, everyone. Come on. You can do better than that. It's a busy day for all of you. We so much appreciate all of you joining us here at the Solutions Summit. This is, as Dan said, the opening session of the 2015, kind of hard to believe we're saying that already, 2015 Solutions Summit. A lot of people coming and going today, so we hope you'll have the chance to meet and greet the folks that are sitting at your table, as well as all the elected officials who are with us this morning. We're going to talk about the different sessions for the Solutions Summit coming up here after we hear from Congressman Hastings, but just so everyone knows, those sessions will be in the breakout rooms to my left, your right, on the south side of the building. So take a look at the map that's inside all of your programs, and you'll find out which sessions are in what room, and you can pick and choose which one you'd like to go to. As Dan said, we opened our Eastern Washington offices at Washington Policy Center 5 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe it's been 5 years since we did that, but we did that in 2009, end of 2009, in Spokane and here in the Tri-Cities. And as Dan said, I'm located up in Spokane, but cover all of Eastern Washington. And then my colleague Jason Mercier is in our Tri-Cities office over in Pasco. So our goal and our efforts here in Eastern Washington are to make sure that not only are we tracking Eastern Washington issues, that we're making sure that we are also a voice for Eastern Washington. And you may have seen, if you're a supporter of Washington Policy Center, some of the projects that we've been working on specifically related to Eastern Washington, not the least of which is giving all of you the opportunity to testify remotely before a legislative committee. How many of you have been to Olympia to testify during the legislative session? So we have probably 20 or 30 folks who have been to Olympia. Others of you may want to go to Olympia during the legislative session or may want to testify before a legislative committee, but cannot do so because you're busy working, or the pass is closed, or you don't have an extra $500 to spend on a plane ticket and a hotel. So what we have said and what we have recommended at Washington Policy Center is giving all of you the opportunity to be involved in the legislative session without having to travel to Olympia, on a remote video conference basis. Now, some of you may have been to our legislative wake-up forums over at the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce on Wednesday mornings. We'll be doing those again this legislative session. But we've been able to take our trusty little laptop computer, a video camera, a projector, and a projector screen, and connect you live to lawmakers at the Capitol building. Now, I can tell you, if we can do that with our little Toshiba computer back there, then Washington State can certainly do that as well. And the system is already in place at many of the community colleges across the state. And we are pleased to announce this morning that actually we tested this. Jason Mercier, who's here with us this morning, tested this and testified for the first time before a legislative committee about a month and a half ago, and it was a success. And he did that on a remote basis from Spokane. And so we're hopeful that that will be expanded to here in Tri-Cities, as well as Bellingham, Vancouver, and perhaps other areas of the state as well. But it is about keeping you involved in the legislative process. One other issue related specifically to Tri-Cities that we worked on a couple of years ago that I want to call your attention to is an issue that was very important, got a lot of attention in the media, and that was the key facts analysis we did of Ben Franklin Transit, which showed a lot of surprising statistics, a lot of surprising numbers. And these are basically just numbers that come from their database, come from the National Transportation Database. You can read that analysis if you want. There are copies of it out on the information table in the lobby, and there's also copies on our website under the Solutions Summit online packet. So I would encourage you to take a moment to go through that if you're interested in Ben Franklin Transit. All of the efforts of our organization in Eastern Washington are due to our Eastern Washington Advisory Board members. Many of you have this sheet that is in all of your folders that lists our Eastern Washington Advisory Board members, many of which are here today. I'd encourage you to get to know all of them because it is them that have made this organization such a big success here in Eastern Washington. We do a lot of the work in terms of getting around to you and speaking to the groups around Eastern Washington and providing common sense ideas, but it's the Eastern Washington Advisory Board that really propels us forward. So I want to thank all the members of the Eastern Washington Advisory Board who are with us here this morning. I'd like to invite three of them to join me on the stage at this time, Mr. Bob Tippett, Lori Mattson, and Jeff Losey. And the reason why I'm bringing them up is because this morning we have the pleasure to honor one of the state's longest serving and most principled elected officials, and that is Congressman Doc Hastings. I know the business leaders that are going to be coming up here in just a second, along with many of you, have very fond memories of Congressman Hastings and the work that he has done. Before we bring him up here, I'd like to give each one of these business leaders an opportunity to share a brief thought with you on what Congressman Hastings has meant to this district. So, Jeff?
Thank you, Chris. Jeff Losey from the Home Builders Association. And 20 years is a long time. And there's not many times that we can say that you have a true friend in Congress. And I will say over the time that Doc has had the opportunity to serve at the federal level, we always knew, and I say we being the Home Builders Association of Tri-Cities, always knew that we had somebody that we could turn to when we had issues and we had problems that we needed to get worked on. And we always knew that we could trust and know that Doc was going to be there for us. And so after, the long time that you've been there, we certainly appreciated having somebody like that who served in Congress. Doc, we will miss you and certainly appreciate the time that you had, that you gave and shared with all of us. Thank you, Doc.
Well, good morning. It's really hard to believe, Doc, that it's been 20 years since you've first been in office. A step down memory lane. Bill Clinton was president back then, and in that election, Doc Hastings defeated Jay Inslee, who is now Governor Jay Inslee. The Sonics were not only in Seattle, but were one of the best teams in the NBA. Ken Griffey Jr. was in center field for the Mariners in the Kingdom. And the Seahawks, well, let's just say we're all really glad to see where the Seahawks have come in 20 years. In 1994, the Tri-Cities area had a combined population of around 160,000 people. And today we have nearly 300,000, and we're still growing. And most of the areas around town that today we see as busy roads and bustling shopping centers and great neighborhoods were nothing more than barren desert and tumbleweeds. This has really been a booming age for the Tri-Cities, but through all of these changes, we've had one steady constant, and that was Doc Hastings. He's been our voice in D.C., standing up for our farmers, our energy, our business community in Hanford. He's truly been the face of the Tri-Cities. So thank you, and enjoy your retirement, and don't be a stranger. Thanks, Doc.
Good morning. Doc, I can only imagine the sense of anticipation you had 20 years ago going to your first swearing-in ceremony. What a privilege, and what amazing time to be a part of history. I also thought of you this morning and what it must be like for you not being there at this swearing-in time where the baton is being handled. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for several things. One is that how you faithfully served. You've thoughtfully served. You've understood the issues. You helped guide us. I think over time we have begun to really appreciate the complexity of our nation and what it takes to govern it and guide it through not only the politics, but just the world events and the country events and the borders. So you've done a marvelous job. We want to thank you for that. And I'd like to invite you up and welcome you to speak to us.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Doc Hastings.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It is really a pleasure for me to be here, and I want to congratulate the Washington Policy Center for the work that they are doing, because truly the ideas of governing in a country that is of the people, by the people, and for the people comes from, I think, more strongly from the local level. And the Washington Policy Center, I think, epitomizes that. And there is Governor Otter, one of my old friends. Butch. How are you, man? Good to see you and see me. Now I've got to change my speech because Butch is here, so... But let me start by saying that it has really been a privilege for me to have the honor to serve and represent you for 20 years. Officially, I have, today is now 2 minutes after 8 according to my clock. That means it's 2 minutes after 11 in Washington, D.C., so that means I have 57 more minutes to be officially a congressman, because at 11:59, that's when I go away. That's when the new Congress is sworn in. But thank you very much for having me here. I want to reflect a little bit on some of the issues that I have experienced in the 20 years. I want to talk about policy, and I want to talk about politics. And I hope I won't offend anybody, because I'm going to be pretty partisan in some areas. But the reason I say that is because politics is an integral part of policy. You simply cannot separate them. And when I was first elected in 1994, since then there has been what we call 3 wave elections. Elections on a national stage where there is a big change in Congress and elsewhere. Obviously 1994 was one of those, and I had an opportunity to participate in that. The next wave election was 2006 when the Democrats took control of the House. That was a huge election. There's no question about that. In 2010 was another wave election, and that's when we regained control of the U.S. House. And then 2014, in my view, is another wave election. Now, that'll have to be played out, and I'll talk about that a bit. But the most significant of those wave elections, in my view, was 2010. And the reason why 2010 was so important, because that wave election affected state houses across the country. And when you have an election that affects state houses in that particular year, it affects the redistricting for the next 10 years. And as a result of that wave election in a number of states, and then was confirmed after the this last election, 2014, the Republicans now control of the 99 state houses. Nebraska is a unicameral legislature, so they only have 1 house. But of the 99 state houses, Republicans now control 66 of the 99. They control county Nebraska. Nebraska is nonpartisan, but by registration, that unicameral House is overwhelmingly Republicans. Republicans now then control 31 of the state legislative bodies. Now, why is that important? It is important for a reason that Daniel just talked about with charter schools. The incubator of new ideas come from the state legislatures. And I believe in the Washington Policy Center, one of the things they stand for is solutions with market ideas. Market ideas are nothing more than ideas of free people making decisions in their local communities. That's what market ideas are all about. Not all the power comes from Washington, D.C. And I dare say in my time in Washington, especially in the last 6 years, we have seen, I think, a very dangerous concentration of power by this president. And the danger is not confined only to his presidency, because once a president establishes a precedent, then future presidents will also embrace that precedent. That's why when you look back at history and we talk about who is the most important president in the history of our country, many people always put Lincoln there because of the Civil War. I certainly wouldn't argue with that. But I would argue probably the most valuable president was George Washington, because he knew every time he made a decision, it set a precedent. And the first precedent he set was 2 terms. There was no term limits then until that was broken by FDR in the 30s. So precedents then are set. And when the president, and I heard on the news just coming in today, he said he wants to work with the Congress, Republican Congress. I hope he does. And I'll reflect on that again with my first 6 years in Congress in the Clinton administration. But I certainly hope he does. But also the news said that he is going to continue doing executive orders. Now, and that's where I think it will be problematic. The good news is executive orders will only last as long as his presidency, and they can be nullified by the next president. Now, the 1992 election was an election that Bill Clinton won, beat Bush won. And many said that was the end of the 12 years of the Reagan presidency. America wanted to change, and I think there's probably some truth to that notion. But if anybody here had read Bob Woodward's book, The Agenda, you would see that what President Clinton was attempting to do is very, very similar to what President Obama has done in his first term of office. The difference is the '94 election, the first midterm after President Clinton was elected. Republicans, when I came in, changed the debate in Washington, D.C. So the choice that President Clinton had going into his second term was, okay, are we going to work together or are we going to be constantly at odds? And I'll give President Clinton a great deal of credit for working together with the Republican Congress. That's not to say that he got everything that he wanted, and it's not to say that the Republicans in the House and the Senate at that time got everything they wanted. But there were some significant policy changes, like welfare reform, for example. That happened during that era. And I might add, in the last 4 years of President Clinton's presidency, we not only balanced the budget, but we ran a surplus and paid down $500 billion in national debt. Now, we all know that the spending power comes from the U.S. House and from the Congress, and so we presented that to the President. He obviously fought a little bit on priorities, but the end result is we balanced the budget for 4 years. 9/11/2001, of course, changed that because the economy shuttered and we had other expenditures, and we're now back into deficit spending. But at any rate, that is a potential that President Obama has in the last 2 years of his term, with now a Republican House, the largest since before the Great Depression, and a pretty large Senate majority also. It's 54 to 46 in the Senate. There are a couple of senators on the other side that may come over, so that majority could be a bit higher. But let me just tell a story about where I mentioned redistricting and how that can have such a profound effect on the local level. And let me go back to North Carolina. Prior to the 2010 elections in North Carolina, the makeup of their 13-member delegation was 7 Republicans or 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans. That was in the Congress before last. In the 2010 election, again, I alluded to the wave election. That wave election resulted in Republicans taking control of both state houses in North Carolina. And what is interesting about the history of that, and by the way, that was the first time since right after the Civil War that the Republicans had controlled the North Carolina legislature. So they were poised then to do redistricting. But of course, in redistricting, the executive branch is always involved with that. Legislature sends it to the governor, and the governor has to sign it. But in North Carolina, they had a habit of electing Republican governors from time to time, but never a Republican legislature. And so some time back, when they had control of a Democrat in the State House and Democrats controlling the legislature, they took the governor out of the redistricting process. They said, okay, the legislature is going to redistrict, and the governor will have no part of that, anticipating that they'll always control the legislature but never the governorship. Well, unfortunately, after 2010, at least for the Democrats, they lost control of both state houses, but they had a Democrat governor, which means then that the Democrat governor had no say at all in the redistricting process. So after the 2010 election, that 7-6 Democrat majority, the next election it went to 9 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And after this election, the makeup of the North Carolina legislature or Congress is now 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats. So those elections, and that's why I talk about policy and politics, are very, very profound if they happen at certain times, and this is just an example of that. I have no doubt that legislatures across the country are going to look very, very seriously at how they are going to deal with Obamacare as it is rolled out. And let me get into the policy part now of where we are. The fact that many states have not embraced a state exchange, and then that issue is in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. If the court rules in a way where the law was very specific, saying that you had to have a state exchange for it to operate, if the Supreme Court says that's what the law says and states haven't done it, then the law, I think, will collapse under its own weight. And so the next question is, what is the policy going to be following that? And I believe that the start of that process will be in this congressional session, because the Supreme Court will probably rule sometime in June. I think the Congress will react in some way, but I think the states will continue to react. I know that some states, for example, with the Medicaid expansion, have said, okay, we'll do the Medicaid expansion, but we'll do it under our terms. And of course, whether that's going to be accepted or not is still problematic, and I suppose the Supreme Court decision will probably settle that. So let me then prognosticate on what's going to happen in this Congress now that will convene here in another 45 minutes. The most important bill that they can pass, the Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate, is the budget. Now, for clarification purposes, the budget in Congress, as we call the budget, is not like a budget probably in most counties, most cities, or for that matter, most state governments. The budget in the Congress is an agreement between the House and the Senate. The President has no say. Yes, the President submits a budget, but the budget process, as we talk about it congressionally, is an agreement between the House and the Senate. Now, what's significant about doing that? If you have a budget that's agreed upon by the House and the Senate, then any policy issues associated with that budget is not subject to the filibuster in the Senate. And to break a filibuster in the Senate, you need 60 votes. As I mentioned right now, Democrats control 54. Unlikely they can get to 60 to break a filibuster. But if they pass a budget, and then they have certain items in their policy items that are reflected in the budget, which is principally taxes and spending, then the filibuster does not come into play. So that means then that there's a lot of initiatives that can be passed. I suspect they'll pass, frankly, with bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. Whether they get to that 60 vote or not is questionable. But they'll go to the President's desk. Now, the President, therefore, has an opportunity. He can sign that legislation. I'll be partisan here. I think that legislation will probably be pretty good legislation if it passes the Republican House and Republican Senate. So he can sign that legislation, take credit for whatever policy is put forth, or he can veto it. And depending on how he approaches this in the next 2 years, will set the stage then for the 2016 presidential election. Because it'll show a contrast, I think, between the two parties. And let me say this one other thing. There is no question in my mind in the 20 years that I have been in Congress that the Republican Party has moved to the right and the Democrat Party has moved to the left. In the last Congress alone, we could count, not all the time, but I would say at least half the time, maybe 60, 70% of the time, we could count on 5 or 6 Democrats to vote with us on some procedural motions, policy issues, whatever the case may be. Let me take the figure of 5 just for our purposes. Of those 5, 2 of them got beat for re-election. 2 of them decided not to run, and Republicans took their seat, and the other one had a scare in the last election. And yet, the Democrats lost control. This is their smallest minority they've had since before the Great Depression. And what they do, they elected exactly the same leaders that led them to this point. And so there's no question that the division, the country is divided pretty evenly, I think, I think the country is a little bit more right of center than left of center. But there's no question that politics is divided, and that is reflected in the parties. And I suspect that is reflected at the state level, too, exactly the same way. And if that being the case, then those incubators that I talked about earlier on are going to be a big part of policy in the future. Now, let me talk bigger term and longer policy, and I think it'll set the stage. By the way, one thing I have learned too in my time in office, things move much more slowly at the federal level than they do at the local level. I mean, I'll just be very parochial here. To get access to the top of Rattlesnake Mountain, to have a land transfer that's important here for areas not going to be used at Hanford, to take 4 and 5 years to get that done is absolutely ridiculous, but that's just the way that the process works. So these changes, these potential changes that I think could happen because of these wave elections I talked about are going to play out in some long time in the future. In that regard, the stage needs to be set to deal with entitlements. Entitlements are not subject to yearly appropriations, and entitlement spending makes up over 60% of the budget. You're probably not aware, but the discretionary part that is subject to appropriations every year, about 40%, this year was less than it was than I think it was in 2008 in terms of real dollars. Discretionary spending has been shrunk because we can control that. But it's the mandatory spending that is going to affect especially the younger generation. When I have an opportunity to speak to audiences, I will see young people in the audience, say 35 or 40 years old, and I'll ask them a very direct question. I'll say, do you believe that when you retire, Social Security in its present form will be there? Nobody has said yes. They all say no. So entitlement spending needs to be addressed for the next generation. And the good news is those that are being affected by that now are coming of age and more politically involved. Paul Ryan being a classic example. Paul Ryan is 44 years old, and he's right into that category, and he understands it. We're getting more and more people, and I suspect legislatures, which tend to be a little bit younger than what the Congress is, I suspect they're going to approach those things exactly the same way. So long term, we need to address the issue of entitlements. And if we address those issues of entitlements with market-based theories and competition, I think that we will get out of this fiscal hole that we're in. But that debate needs to start sooner rather than later. So if the Republicans then in the Congress pass a budget and then put forth policy issues where the president can either sign them, good policy, or veto them to have a contrast for the next election, I suspect that will be a very successful congressional year if that happens. Now, I hope that the president signs those pieces of legislation, because the sooner we can make reforms to this, the better off we are. So as I finish my time, I will simply say that I have had the opportunity, and many times when my office was always in the Longworth office building right across the street from the Capitol, and I always reflect that when we call the votes, we come out of our offices and meetings from different places and coalesce and walk over to the Capitol. And at any one time, I could be walking with somebody from Florida, from New York, from Missouri, from Nevada, all over, and we all represent about the same number of people, roughly 700,000 people. But obviously, no congressional district is the same. And yet, this system does work if you trust the people. If you trust the people. Because we're a country largely of immigrants anyway. And I doubt, just think back, maybe those of you have gone through where your ancestors came from. But when your ancestors came from the old country, wherever that was, I doubt if they were the elite. They probably weren't. And they came over here, but they experienced this thing called freedom. And this thing called freedom, I think, has worked very, very well for us. Which reminds me of the last thing I'll say, and if you have any, you want to take some questions too here? All right. The last thing I will say is this, and that is when the Constitution was put together in Philadelphia. A lady supposedly approached Ben Franklin, who was one of the delegates there, and asked what they had done, what they had produced there. And he said, and I'll paraphrase, a Republican, if we can keep it. The operative words there are if we can keep it. And that means obviously participating in the political process by voting, participating in think tanks like this, of ideas that can happen to remove this remarkable thing called a government of the people forward. So I've had the real privilege, and I mean it very sincerely, to have experienced that for 20 years. And it indeed has been a privilege for me to be able to do that. And I want to thank all of you here that was helpful Have any questions? I'll be more than happy, Chris, to answer any questions.